staring at his own corpse looming above him. The cold gray room faded to black, submerging him in darkness until he could no longer see his horrifying reflection. Dragging in a breath, his lungs filled, but it was wrong. It wasn't air that filled his lungs. No, it was too heavy, so heavy. He felt crushed under the weight until nothing could be heard, nothing could be seen, nothing could be felt. Nothing would seem to last forever, stretching out everywhere, yet nowhere at all. Nothing would feel like all that's left, but as he continued to drift through nothing, something would break through that darkness. A voice, as if far in the distance, yet right behind. He would hear a familiar woman calling out to him. Suddenly, completely aware, his eyes would jut open as his lungs dispelled pitch black water, pouring out from his mouth, the waterfall of a denied death. Sucking in air with greed, the sting of salt would remind him of the life he still had, yet relief would not follow. Instead, dread would take residence over his body. As each breath would wake him more, all that would become clear would be what he saw. He was panicked, his mind racing. What gave chase was no monster, but a nightmare worse than any other, because what would stalk him, lead him to run, and confront him when nothing was left, was himself. It made his heart race. He was his own monster, and that wasn't something he could outrun. But is it something he could live with? Would it let him live? Confusion cutting through the panic, it calmed him down enough to take in his surroundings. He would find himself on a shoreline, soaked and cold as the breeze of the salty air made each droplet of water feel like pinpricks along his skin. Off in the distance, he would see a tall structure, though in the darkness and fog, it was hard to determine what it could be. Picking himself up, he would brush the wet mush of sand off his body and make his way towards what he hoped would be shelter. As he walked, he thought to himself that wherever it was he washed up, something about it felt familiar. Nowhere he had been, but possibly something he'd seen. Almost as if he was making his way through a painting from his childhood. However strange that would seem to him. But as he closed the distance between the structure, he was now able to tell what it was, making his stomach turn, realizing the familiarity. As what stood in front of him was a lighthouse, one just like on the labels of the various bottles she would bring home, making their way to lay empty in little hiding spots around the house and even in the car. Bottles that led into ugly confrontation, screaming matches, and the final night. Quickly shaking away the thoughts, not wanting to linger, he made his way towards the lighthouse, eventually finding himself at a door barely holding on. With a tug at the entrance, the rotting wood released the latches, letting the husk of its former glory fall to the side. Paying no mind to the decrepit state of the building, he would make his way inside. Greeted by air that wasn't rushing over him, he took a breath. With little light, there wasn't much he could make out. Not that there was much he needed, as long as he could find something warm. Feeling his way around the rounded structure, it wouldn't be long before he found a little room that would seem to be a sleeping quarters. Finding a bed that was fully made, as if someone didn't make it to their next night of sleep. The weight of everything finally sunk in, and he'd felt as if his eyes were made of stone. Unable to remember the last time he slept, he untucked the blanket and crawled into the bed, quickly letting the hands of sleep take him. However, even while he slept, he couldn't truly rest. Nightmares consumed him as his fears could not hide, each dream a story of what he's lost, a tale of an apocalypse. Finding himself at a house with strangers bonded through trauma, they had to move quick, but one had grown sick. A mother. Unable to leave the shelter, it was only a matter of time, but with everyone antsy to leave, her son would stay by her side. Before leaving, the son gave him a memento for all he had done for them. Not wanting to leave, but knowing they had to, they shared a final glance before leading the group to safer land. As they trekked on, he would notice a wheelchair, Lighting up like lightning, he would grab the thing and make his way back to the boy and his mother as fast as he could. He found himself there all too late, as nothing but bodies would be left. Falling to his knees, he felt emotions swell, but before a tear could make its escape, one would fall from the ceiling, landing on him, drawing his attention up, where he would be greeted by the contorted features of himself, drowning the rooms in pools of black, taking his last breath as the black, viscous liquid rose. His eyes would snap open as a faint light crept through the door of the sleeping quarters. Not fully processing what was happening, he would stumble out of bed, where he'd noticed the source of the light coming from above. Nervously, he would make his way up the stairs, finding it to become brighter and brighter as he climbed the endless spiral, until finally he confronted a ladder, using it to reach the top. What he already suspected was confirmed when he saw as the lighthouse roared with life as the bright light danced in its continuous circle. Shielding his eyes as to not be blinded, he would make his way to the outer railing to see if he could find what happened to bring this lighthouse back in order. But looking down, he'd be struck with vertigo, as he took in how high he truly was, finding that below him, nothing but black waves crashed into a cliffside of many rocks. As the waves continued to crash against a wall made by time, he found himself entranced, reminded of her. What should be thoughts of comfort were nothing but unease. An uncomfortable feeling would blossom in his chest as he couldn't seem to bring himself away from the thoughts of her, what she had done, what he had done. As his eyes would begin to sting, tears would fall. A selfish feeling would take over as he wished things were normal, but they could never go back. The world has changed. Things were different, and so he continued to stare out on the waves. But eventually, something would break through that darkness. Breathing. As if right behind. He swung around to see him, skin darkened from decay, clenching onto bone, with a face that shared the features of him, although more tight, with eyes that were pools of fire as the orange flames danced inside its cage. Fear gripping onto him, he would try to back up, but losing his footing, he would slip and find himself on the other side of the railing. Plummeting, he would notice as the decayed face leered at him as it seemed to grow further and further away. Realizing what's to come next, he squeezed his eyes shut, preparing for an impact he couldn't survive. Yet as time passed, nothing would happen. It wouldn't be until he felt brakes tug his body forward in a stop he wasn't ready for that he'd open his eyes. Fear gripped onto him as he noticed the bus was at his stop. Looking around at piers that felt like ghosts of a distant past, a ringing would take space in his head. Pushing through the rows of seats, he'd make his way off the bus, unable to take in the familiar surroundings. The chill of an autumn start, the silence of a neighborhood at rest. Even alone, he felt his eyes peered at him, looking around at homes that hid their secrets of their owners. He couldn't find the eyes that felt to grow more intense by the moment. Unsure of what to do, he cautiously made his way to a house that never felt like home, each step feeling like an echo through his mind. Approaching the street he'd turned down hundreds of times before, he froze to take in what he thought he'd never have to relive. Moments would pass as he stood there, waiting for time to reveal the mirage, but as the house at the end of the street continued to stand there was only one thing he could do. Feeling impossibly heavy, he would make the first step leading into the second, and then the third. One after another, unease ripped through his entire self. Going back to that place, that house, made him nauseous. He couldn't imagine what waited behind those doors, the secrets that house kept. But as the road's endless stretch came to a close, he was confronted by memories that darkened his mind. The unease would brew into something worse, something he hadn't felt since then. As the venomous feeling grew inside him, he would take his first steps into a garage lined with gray and red tiles on the floor, past the smoke-stained couch, and next to a dartboard where shots would never be made stood the door. The one that led him inside, the one that he had entered so many times before. Reaching out to the brass doorknob, the cool feeling would bring him moment's peace as he twisted it, giving way to a burst of air so familiar it brought a tear to his eye. But that tear would not fall alone, as it was what he heard that would make him weak. The laughter of a sibling long lost to time and pain. Running up those stairs, paying no mind to his surroundings, he would freeze to see as his brother sat there, playing with the toys oh so familiar to him. Frozen for only a moment, he'd rush him into a hug of years of pain. Tears would flood from his eyes, giving way to a pounding in his head. The pain gripped him hard, but he could care less as the last piece of his heart was there in his embrace. Pushing off of him, the brother sat there confused, not made any easier to understand by the tears continuing to pour out from his face. But as the creak of the door downstairs led into the sound of a hard shut, it dawned that all good things must come to an end. As joints popped with each step up the stairs, venom started to take its residence within him. Each step fueling a bitter taste into his mouth. Head cresting above the staircase, he'd see him, that living corpse. Fearing the worst, he stood, ready to oppose the anger that hurt him so many times before. The same feelings that hurt and took away the last piece of his heart. But as that corpse approached, it simply pushed him aside, making him fall back into the kitchen. Fear gripped him as he saw his mangled self make his way towards his heart. His brother wore a panicked look as fear widened his eyes, unable to do anything but back away. He couldn't let this happen again. This couldn't be how this goes. He couldn't let it. Fear taking over, he was no longer in control. His actions not his own. He'd grab a blade encased in a wood block and rush over to the corpse that haunted him long enough. Shoving it down, he would embrace it, thrusting sharpened steel towards it. Holding the knife tightly, he felt as the steel made contact with skin, and with not much effort, ripped through it, plunging the knife deep into its chest. Not satisfied with the first thrust, he would remove the knife from the fleshy casing and thrust it again and again and again. Blackened blood would splatter across his hands and his face as he continued to plunge this blade in and out, over and over, never satisfied with the last stab. Not after everything. He was lost to that rage, a taste almost as bitter as the metallic splatters that would make it into his mouth. No. It would be too late before the crying broke through the static playing in my head. Looking away from the mangled corpse below me, I see as my heart cried out. Fear in his eyes. Fear not for the body under me, but no. He was scared of me. Pushing myself up, leaving a bloody handprint, I couldn't think as to what I should say. What I should do. He screamed out to me, asking me why I did it. How could I? But I just wanted to protect you from... Looking over to the corpse, color fled from my face as I fell to my knees. There she laid, hair like the blackest of waves, framing her face, with eyes that had grown milky, in a mouth that stretched tight. I did it. I killed her. Terror stricken over me, I would rush my way out of the house, just running further and further as I tried to push what happened behind me. Days passing, he'd find himself growing tired. And as the sun veiled itself behind the mountain peaks, anguish grew within him. He knew what would come next. Without shelter, they're easy prey for whatever was out there.